infrastructure for him to survive and be successful. That seems to be a little bit more of the focus on that. But, in terms of figuring out the evaluation, it's constantly changing. And you see, it used to be we had the era of the huge quarterback with Peyton and Tom and Big Ben. And then the Russell Wilson, thing happens, and then everybody says, okay, well, we can excuse away size. And then you see, Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray come in, and so then it's not really size. But then you see the off-platform, off-script style of Patrick Mahomes. And it's not really size. Allen and teams that try. That it's constantly changing, and people can't necessarily, nail it down on one style. I think it comes down to, does he have the traits in the makeup and all those things? That's the questions there. Different styles, that's not something to get carried away with. To me, it's more a focus of, do we have the right play caller, the right offensive line to protect him, and do we have some guys he can get the ball to? I think that seems to be, what's going to lead to these guys being a success or not, more so than even just how good the player at the quarterback position might be.
Next question comes from Dave Burkett with the Detroit Free Press. Dave, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, always good to hear from you. Look forward to seeing you next week. Just want to ask you about a couple of the interior linemen, I guess, who have a chance to go late round one. Barton from Duke, Jackson Powers-Johnson, and Zach Frazier. Can you, maybe compare, contrast them? What do they do well? What do they lack? And do any of those guys jump out as a Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, Lions type to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something I've talked to a bunch of teams around the league, is these three guys paired together and teams going through their meetings trying to sort these guys out. Ironically, I would have it Graham Barton, Jackson Powers-Johnson, then Zach Frazier. And if you ask me who's the Lion in the group, I would say the third one. I would say Frazier. I mean, the four-time state champ wrestler, the guy who's just got a tenacity to him and a physicality to him through the whistle. He kind of fits their style, as there. And I think he'd taken there in the bottom of the first round. I'd have no problem with that at all. But in terms of stylistically, Graham Barton is the best athlete of the three. I think he has legit, 5-position flexibility. He can move around, do different things, play left tackle. I think he's best at center, but I think he can survive at tackle if you needed him to. He's fully capable of playing guard as well. But he's the best in space, change of direction, just overall athleticism. He's really, really talented there. And then Jackson Powers-Johnson is, he's just big. He's 328 pounds. He's going to be more set of firm pocket. You want to kind of, you want more of a mauler brawler in the run game. He's not a poor athlete. He's just not the athlete that the other two guys are out in space. But he's a physical, strong, sturdy presence there in the middle you'll be able to set a nice deep pocket with him. So I think they're three kind of distinctly different players, but I think all three of them are excellent. I think all three of them are ready to start right away.
Next question comes from Jim White. Titans, Jim.
Daniel, appreciate your time as always. It's picking at 7 in the first, 38 overall in the second. What would you say be the best case scenario for them based on their needs as far as which players at 7, 38?
Well, to me, 7, it almost feels like you're in a spot there where the left tackle position is going to force your hand. And I think that's not a bad thing in this draft. I think there's great options there. I mean, it feels like from the very beginning of this process, Joe Alt has been connected to them. They're at that spot. There's a chance we'll see what happens with Chargers. What do they do? They could potentially be an offensive line team. I wouldn't even rule out the Giants as maybe a sneak offensive line team, but I think there's still a good shot that Joe Alt's staring him in the face. And I think that's a home run pick. Just safe, secure, solid player who I think he's got some up. So I like the fact you got a high floor and a high ceiling with him. That would be the from there at 7. And then when you look at pick 38, You look at a couple different areas they could go, defensive tackle being one, and edge rusher. So if I'm gonna pull up that list and look at guys who, could kind of be in that mix, oh gosh, I would say Darius Robinson would probably factor into that a little bit from Missouri, who could actually have both of those things. He this last year coming off the edge as opposed to before interior guy. He gives you some versatility there. So that would be in there if you went with Alt and then came back with Darius Robinson there at the top of the second round.
Next question with ESPN, John.
Thank you. Hey, Daniel, it's Adam Peters' first draft in Washington. We obviously know they have the number 2 pick, 6 picks in the top 100. How important is this draft in terms of setting up the future for this franchise? How much can they really set this place up?
Oh, I think it's huge. And, I think he's got a massive decision in front of him, starting with his very first pick. So that's a lot of pressure. That's difficult when you are just coming together, with a coach and a general manager, not to mention new owner, new organization, and trying to, learn your existing roster. They were very aggressive in free agency in terms of bringing in a lot of guys. So trying to make all these pieces fit. And then, oh, by the way, right away, you've got to make a call on the quarterback position and make sure that you get that right. But I've known Adam for a very long time. I don't know that they could have hired a better person for where they are as a franchise right now, because Adam's a scout at heart. He's a grinder. He's a worker. To have all this draft capital year one, I think it's in good hands with a guy who's got experience of helping to build some great rosters. So I'd be curious to see. I think they stick and pick. I think they take the quarterback at 2, and then I'm curious from then on out. At 36 and 40, I think they, if you're going to play that rookie quarterback, I still think the offensive line has to be addressed. And I'm not loving the fact of sitting at 36 and 40. I think they're a prime candidate to come back up and try and scoop up one of these tackles. Like if you've got Amarius Mims, who's floating around there in the teens, they have plenty of ammunition to be aggressive and go get a starting offensive tackle. So that to me is something I would keep an eye on. I don't see them standing pat and sticking there at 36 and 40. I think that you'll see them try and make a move and address the offensive line.
Next question comes from Nate Davis with USA Today. Nate, you may ask your question.
EJ, thanks for your time and insight as always. You kind of just touched on the crux of my question. I think you mocked Marvin Harrison, the Jets, in your recent drafts, but just maybe some teams that aren't necessarily in the quarterback market that you kind of expect might be aggressive trade-wise, and then, again, not do you think maybe teams could aggressively?
That to go up there and make that move, that was my I think I used the word chaos. I was going for chaos to have some fun. Maybe that's the problem with mocks is you get to one point in time, there's subordinate sets in. You want to shake up the snow globe a little bit. But in terms of, one thing I would say on the Jets, though, the one thing about them moving, talking about them, and we'll get on these other teams. If Adunze is kind of we've been talking about him potentially being in Chicago. Like if he gets to 8, I could make a very strong argument that the Jets could make an easy, painless flip with Atlanta, where Atlanta goes back to 10. They could leapfrog Chicago and take it to Dunze. And that wouldn't cost them much. You literally give them your 3, they give you a 4. You can, have some other picks involved there, but you wouldn't necessarily lose a pick. You could swap a pick. But in terms of other teams, to be aggressive, I mentioned Washington, bottom of or top of the second round, being a team that could jump back up and make a move. I never sleep on Howie Roseman as a potential to go north or south. I always keep an eye on them. I think they have a pretty obvious need there at corner. You have somebody like Tyrion Arnold or even Mitchell. If Quinyon Mitchell, if either of those guys start to drift a little bit, I wouldn't sleep at all on the Eagles. Being an aggressive team to go up there and try and get one of those corners. Other teams to be a team to keep an eye on, to move around a little bit. I mean, those are kind of the key ones. The other one I would say is the Saints have historically in their DNA been an aggressive team. They're in a position where they have a dire need at tackle. I think they could stay where they are at 14 and get a really good one. But you know, they're always a candidate to move up and try and get the guy that they really love.
Next question comes from Ryan Dunleavy with the New York Post. Ryan, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel. Thanks for doing this. Kind of a trend I've noticed lately with fans is that no one really appreciates a consistently good team anymore. It's like if you don't have a QB who can win the Super Bowl, you have to go try to get one, and you're trying to accelerate the process and skip the steps. So when it seems like teams like the Giants, the Commanders, the Browns haven't been good often in the last decade, should they worry about getting to the level of like the Steelers, the Cowboys, the Seahawks in terms of consistently good? I'm wondering why you think that is. If there's like a CJ Stroud element to we can go from bad to a contender really quickly. And do you think teams should, you know, like I said, consistently be thinking about the Super Bowl behind the scenes, or is there a subset of teams that need to build up their roster and then worry about the Super Bowl quarterback?
Well, I think there's obviously two, schools of thought, right? You get you build up the entire roster, then you drop the quarterback in the mix, and then you're good to go. And the other part of it is if you have a chance to, get what you believe is a premier quarterback, even if the rest of your team isn't in place, you're going to have the pressure to go ahead and make that move. So I think there is definitely something to the superstar quarterback era that we're in right now, particularly in the AFC, where it's just hard. When you're in draft meetings and you're looking at it and going like, these are the quarterbacks we have to run through. Like we can build the most, the talented team and a balanced team. But at the end of the day, those big games, and especially if we were to get into the tournament, are going to come down to can our quarterback compete with their quarterback and make the throws you have to make to go win something. So I think that's kind of the pressure on these teams is we don't have one of those guys. We're always in search of trying to find one. And I think the consistent playoff teams have, consistent quarterback play. So it's just there's about I looked it up a while ago. It feels like there's, maybe two teams a decade.
He froze. Sorry, folks. I'm going to get this back in a second. I think somehow it froze up. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to get it back in a second. That's strange. Just dropped, and then I got to get back in. And we're back in. Okay.
It's
recording in progress.
And ever more premium on defensive tackles. I was talking to a general manager this morning, and I said, when you look around the league, and we ask, who are the true impact dominant defensive tackles? Maybe 7 or 8 of them. Edge rushers, it goes a lot deeper than that. And when you look at the draft, to me, there's some other interesting names you could go after outside the first round at the edge rusher position. It falls off pretty quick at defensive tackle. So even though everybody's kind of looking in the sack issues they've had and them needing an edge rusher, I wouldn't just totally rule out Murphy there as somebody that they could be at least interested in.
Thanks. Next question comes from Bob McMiniman with the Arizona Republic. Bob, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thank you again for this. Question is, you had a tweet the other day about the Cardinals and how they could set themselves up for next 5 to 7 years. And I guess it's because Monty Ossenfort really has a whole field of play here with 11 picks, 6 in the top 97 in the top 104. What kind of strategy do you think he's going to play here with so much draft capital and a lot of needs? But to go back to that tweet, how do you intertwine what you said with what he has in front of him to deal with?
Yeah, I can't wait to see what he does. You know, I think there's some things you want to get accomplished here. No, number one, you still need blue chip players. Like, you know, you can't always, you know, trade back and just keep getting more and more and more picks. Eventually, you got to add more. They need blue chip talent players here. So I think there's a way where they can get creative. I think there's a way where they can serve all these masters. In other words, they to add picks into the future. Keep that. I love it when you've got all this capital. Hey, let's not spend it all this year. Let's try and keep accumulating things for next year. I am in a prime position to be able to get out at 4 if they want to, come back up and still get, you know, one of those top 3 receivers. So, you know, if they think those guys are close and who knows what order they have them in, I think that order changes around the league. I think they can get one of those guys, which is a top 5 player, while also collecting a little something extra. It's a way for them to add impact guys, positions of need, while also, you know, continuing to add some more firepower here. But yeah, this is a set your franchise up situation here for the Arizona Cardinals. The Houston Texans did it last year. If you go back and look at a lot of the Super Bowl teams, you know, you can identify the 1 or 2 year period where their draft set that run up. Seattle's one that comes right to mind, you know, what they did over a couple of years. I remember, you know, back when I was in Baltimore in the early 2000s, the Chargers had gone on a good run, and we had talked about it in our meeting room that they had literally back-to-back drafts, just 2 drafts where they hit on about 5 guys each, and it set them up to be a really competitive team for a decade. So this is their moment here. So they need to, you know, they need to get some guys who really make a difference for them.
Next question comes from Chase Goodbread in Tuscaloosa. Chase, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, good to see you. Wanted to ask you about, you know, you hear a lot of comparisons around here about Dallas Turner and Will Anderson being that they were college teammates for a couple of years. It was pretty obvious that Anderson had a little more power as a bull rusher, but can you just touch on that difference and any other differences or similarities you see between them?
Yeah, I first of all, great to hear your voice, buddy. I saw a little bit of the A-Day game the other day. That was the scene. The thing with these 2 guys, they are, I don't know, I say polar opposite, but they are not similar at all. Dallas has got a little more juice in terms of his get off, and his burst is pretty elite. He's a better bender. He's just a more fluid, loose athlete than Will. Will is just, he's got a lot more horsepower. Not just, you know, with the bull rush, playing through blocks. He's a little more knockback at the point of attack against the run, whereas, you know, Turner's a little more use your length and just kind of set the edge. You know, there's some people around the league that aren't as high on Turner, you know, in terms of him being the top guy in this draft, and they've used the words, you know, they thought, oh, he's kind of soft, he's not tough, he's not physical. And I'm like, nah, I don't agree with that at all. I think there's a difference between being a violent player, like a Jared versus a real violent, you know, angry, physical player. While I think with Turner, he's more of a firm player. Like, he's still doing a good job. He's not getting blown back. He's holding the point of attack. He's just not going to get a ton of knockback, you know, from that standpoint. So I think he gets unfairly criticized with that. I think he's a player, you know, with his combination of length and bend and athleticism. I think he plays hard. I think he's a really good player. But yeah, stylistically, very, very different than what you have with Will Anderson.
Next question comes from Andy.
Say again. You mentioned the Saints have it in Denver, and meanwhile, George Payton, he's spoken of the more darts philosophy, trading down to picks. But number 12 with this QB need the Broncos have, what's the best play for them? Up, down, or stand pat?
I mean, I think the best play is to try and move down. Unless I would say if they, if we have a situation where if Minnesota makes a move for Drake May, right? So let's say somehow New England they want to just get the haul and they want to get out of there at 3. And the trade up for Minnesota actually ends up being Drake May and not JJ McCarthy. I don't know who the other JJ McCarthy team is. So I think at that point, if you're Denver and you're staying there at 12 and you hear reports that they like him, then you stick and pick and you get the 4th quarterback right there at 12. Cause I don't think there's another McCarthy team if it's not the Vikings. Outside of that, let's say, McCarthy's gone and you're staring there at, Bo Nix seems to be one that's popular there. Obviously Penix would still be on the board. If you want to take a quarterback, I think at that point in time, you could probably afford to move back a little bit and just see whatever else you could accumulate and then make that pick. The challenge is going to be, I don't know who at that point in time is coming up, unless it's somebody that's coming up to position themselves, to get a tackle, assuming that the Raiders could be a tackle team and the Saints right there are a tackle team. So maybe you get somebody, I'm looking down there. Maybe if the Bengals wanted to jump up there for a tackle, maybe you get the Rams who wanted to move up there for a tackle. But I think they could be in a position where they might not be able to get out. So that might be what they want to do. I just don't know if they're going to be able to find a partner there.
Next question comes from Scott Abraham in Washington. Scott, you may ask your question.
DJ, appreciate you doing this.
Now Playing You by Cam Meekins.
Hey Siri, stop.
All those 4 quarterbacks at the same time, and ultimately, what's their decision going to be at number 2, you think?
Look, I talked to Adam the other day about having those guys in there, and it's just they've done it in San Francisco, and there's value there. He didn't mention this, but I from other teams, been around other teams, that a lot of times that can be, as a way to cater to the owner. The owner is not necessarily going to be in town in the building on a day-to-day basis, so it's a way to be efficient, to bring all these guys in there, get a chance to meet with the owner. He can be around them and get a feel for them. So I think that's some of the philosophy behind bringing those guys in together. In terms of what they're going to do, I honestly, I've known Adam forever. He's never going to say a word. I don't think that's going to get out. I think all of us are going to find out who they're picking once they get on the clock and turn the card in there in Detroit. I've been connecting them to Drake May for a long time. I just felt like that fit there. I think about, DQ going to a Super Bowl with Matt Ryan. And I think about, what Matt Ryan was coming out, strengths, weaknesses. And I thought it actually married up pretty well with Drake. So that who had been my connection there. But in talking to, coaches and executives around the league, they're like overwhelmingly convinced around the league that this is Jaden Daniels, that he's going to be the pick there at number 2. And it would, I like Jaden Daniels a lot. I like all these 3 quarterbacks. So that seems to be the expectation from folks around the league. But again, I think anybody that says they know exactly what Washington's doing is lying, because I don't think Adam's saying a word.
Next question comes from Omar Navarro with Chargers. Omar, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thank you for doing this. Obviously, this will be Jim Harbaugh's first draft with the Chargers. How do you think he puts his stamp on the roster in round 1?
Well, I think in an ideal world, I think they'd like to get out of there, trade back and get extra picks and kind of build out as many players that kind of fit his vision for the team. So to me, I think, this makes sense to be kind of volume to them, come away with some extra picks, continue, add guys that fit their, new physical philosophy of how they want to play the game. So there's been a lot of debate. They take a receiver, do they take an offensive lineman? What do they do there at 5? I think the overwhelming preference would be that they get out of it, find somebody that wants to come up, and then they can continue to build the needs in this team. Because while we've been focused so much on that ball, like They could use a big time defensive tackle. They could absolutely use another corner. At some point in time, they're going to need to add a linebacker, an off the ball linebacker. So they've got a lot of things they need to get accomplished here. So for him to put his stamp on it, to me, I think it would be more about, just the volume of the players that they bring in that kind of fit what he wants to do. And that's going to go long after the first round's over. I think they'll do that throughout the draft.
Next question comes from Adam Beasley. Adam, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks as always for doing this.
No problem, man.
We had a chance to chat with Greer yesterday, and it's not as simple as we're taking the best available of the 6 offensive tackles. He was very clear that the fit had to be right. Of those top 6, which are the ones do you think fit best with the Dolphins?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, I mean, when you look at guys, to me, you want guys that can move around a little bit and guys that can protect. So if I'm looking at, where the Miami Dolphins are picking there at 21, Alt's gone. I think Fuaga's gone. I think Fashanu's gone. I think there's a chance that Latham could be there. I think Latham would fit them. I think Fautanu would be a great fit. I mean, I don't think he'll be there. He's my 11th player, but like these guys have them in different orders. But that to me, the two that I would feel great about is somehow Fautanu got there, or if it was Latham in terms of being ready to go right away. Amarius Mims has the freaky upside, but with this Dolphins team, it feels like, man, they're ready to go right now. And I think the presence of somebody like Latham is just a little bit more prepared to step in right now and go.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Next question comes from Mark Maskey. Mark, you may ask your question.
The new kickoff rule that was approved last month, do you see that showing up at all, and to what extent?
Not again. Oh, here we go again. Why this keeps happening? Let me try something.
Like this stuff that we used to do a lot of in scouting that you really haven't had to do over the last few years as the return game has kind of diminished. But now they're like, okay, well, we're close on these 2 corners. Well, this one actually was a kickoff returner 2-3 years ago. They're going back and watching all those returns because now that has a little bonus to it, a lot of value. So I think it impacts the draft. Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially this year, not knowing, I think there's teams and decision makers that want to be ahead of the curve a little bit and view that as, that could be a difference making play again and something that we haven't seen in terms of how this is set up. So yeah, I think I'm fascinated to see it. And I think it's going to help separate a lot of ties between players. And it's also going to be an easy sell for college teams now, with some of these, premier young players that they have to convince them that, hey, you can add to your value by, being a returner for us. So I think that'll be fun as well.
Next question comes from Eric Branch of the San Francisco Chronicle. Eric, you may ask your question. Eric, you there? Eric Branch?
Sorry, here I am. Hey, kind of a no-duck question since everyone wants to do well in the draft. But it relates to the 49ers. They've got a semi-aging core. They've got, the salary cap issues looming. They have 10 picks. Their last couple drafts have been kind of meh, except for obviously Brock Purdy. How do you view the importance of this? Maybe just replenishing the roster with, maybe some young talent.
Yeah, I think it can be a good, where they're picking. I mean, it's kind of the punishment of success, that it's hard to find, those premier players when you're at the back of every round. But I do think that they have such a rock solid nucleus of blue players. If you're looking at, the elite teams have them between 8 and 12, blue chip guys, premier guys. They've got that kind of checked. So now it's about, having the depth in place that you can withstand injuries and not having, enormous drop off at these other positions. So yeah, I don't think they need superstar drafts, but I think they need depth along the offensive line. I think they can find upgrades there. I think, continue to look at the corner position. I think in a draft like this, where they're picking, those picks at 63, 94. I think there's opportunities there to get players that can come into the secondary and help out and be a part of their mix right away. And, add another receiver along the way as well shouldn't be difficult to do in this draft.
Next question comes from Rich Cimini with ESPN. Rich, you may ask your question.
Great, thanks so much, DJ. I want to pose a Jet scenario for you. Okay. If the top three receivers are gone, which is likely, and Joe Alt is gone, so then the Jets are probably looking at Bowers or the next best offensive tackle. What do you think Joe Douglas would do in that scenario? And if he goes tackle, who do you think might be the preference after Joe Alt?
Yeah, I mean, my guess on the tackle front would be Fuaga. I think it would be Fuaga or Fautanu, one of those two guys. I would guess, Fuaga, but I think both those guys have some position flexibility, which, when he's been healthy, I think has been big with guys like Vera Tucker, to be able to get your best five out there. So I think there's a bonus there with having, those two guys. But to be honest, and I have talked to Joe, but that would be, if you're going to ask that decision, my gut tells me I think they would take Bowers. I think he comes from an organization and all the time in Baltimore where they had great tight ends, and they've always done a good job of drafting tight ends. But I think that's they've got, I like their tight end room now. Conklin's a solid player, but this would give them a little something different there that they don't have. So that would be if it came down to that between the tight end and with Alt off the board, I would guess Bowers, and then I would put Fuaga and Fautanu right behind that.
Next question comes from Chris Franklin with NJ.com. Chris, you may ask your question. Chris Franklin.
Oh, hey, sorry about that. Hey, guys, Daniel, thanks for taking time to do this, man. When you're looking at the Eagles, and especially in terms of late.
I think I lost you.
We lost you, Chris. All right, we'll go on to the next one. Next question comes from Stu Jackson with the Rams. Stu, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks for doing this. So Wes Snead, he's left all options on the table as far as sticking and picking, maybe trading up, maybe trading back. The Rams are still, I believe, tied with a couple other teams for the most selections entering the draft. So looking at 19th overall, what are the scenarios that you potentially see where, whether it's addressing offense or defense, they move up or they stay put or they trade back?
Yeah, I mean, they already have a ton of resources. I wouldn't, I talked earlier about a team like Washington potentially coming up for one of those tackles. That was one of the spots I thought, okay, that would be the most less move ever, is that they finally have a first round pick after all these years. And right when they go on the clock, they announce that they've traded out to get some assets here in the second round. And I wouldn't rule it out again for something like that to happen where he has a zillion day 2 picks in rounds 2 and 3 and just continues to attack it that way. I think you could make an argument that might be the smartest course of action there. They have the ammunition if they want to move up. I would think if a guy like Byron Murphy, no one who just left the building, if Byron Murphy, started to drift a little bit, I would think that would be an obvious one for them to target to go up, as well as if, one of those 3 edge rushers, if they have a preference on those guys, I wouldn't sleep on that as well. But in talking to teams around the league over the last week, I think it's a lot closer with Chop Robinson with those top 3 guys than maybe some people expect. So I had Turner at 12 on my list. Verse was 14. Latu was 16. Robinson was 21. And there's a lot of people out there that think that Chop Robinson could end up being like the second edge rusher to go. So if those, there's those 4 guys, I think there's a decent chance one of those 4 guys is just going to be right there for him at 19, and that would not be a bad way to go.
Next question comes from Bill Bender. Bill, you may ask your question.
Hey, thank you for doing this as always. With JJ McCarthy, I'm sure you've been asked every question, but it's kind of a 2-part. Like, this notion that he might do more in the NFL because he was asked to do less at Michigan, how true is that? And, how viable is it that, I know you kind of answered this question, but how viable do you see the possibility of him actually going in the top 5?
Yeah, I mean, two different questions, right? I mean, the best way I heard this explained to me, and I'm like, I love the way it was said, which was, like somebody was watching tape with McCarthy, and they got to watching a drive, and they got into the red zone, and he said, well, you can kind of fast forward it from here. And he's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, this is just Michigan football from here on in. Like, we're just gonna run the ball. Like that's gonna work, and they're gonna get their way in the end zone. And Jim Harbaugh wasn't gonna, why throw it if you don't have to throw it? And they didn't. And then he said, look, we worked on red zone passing, every day in practice and put in all the work, and I've got all that experience. But he said they didn't need it, except in a few games, including in the Alabama game when he played well. So that's why it's a difficult evaluation, because you can see him do everything you want him to do, or that you need a big time quarterback to do. It's just the numbers in terms of the volume is not there. So you've got somebody that, if you look at him from a size standpoint, I think he's put on like 15 pounds in the last year. I think he's still growing into his body. He's going to be a bigger guy. Everybody that was at the pro days, that I talked to said he threw it as well or better than any of the top quarterbacks. He's got a live, big time live arm. So you've got enough size, a guy who's still growing. He's got a big arm. He's incredibly smart. Like, there's things you can latch onto there. You're just going to have some faith, and some do and some don't on what you're buying there. But in terms of him going, the Vikings are the team that's connected to him, and then you have the Denver Broncos. And so, is that enough to warrant a move all the way up there, or do those teams try and be patient and see how it falls? That I don't know. I'll put it this way. I feel like if you told me that JJ McCarthy goes beyond the 12th pick, I'd be shocked. And then outside of that, everything's on the table. Whether or not that's a trade up to 4, 5, whether that's just trade up just a couple spots, or whether those teams stand pat. I think all those options are in play.
Next question comes from Dane Mizutani with the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Dane, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ. This works out well because I cover the Vikings. But when you look at the situation in place in Minnesota, and you kind of take that into account, how does that set up for if they do take a rookie quarterback compared to other situations and other teams that might be looking to take the same type of player?
I would say if you gave truth serum to the quarterbacks and the agents of all the top guys, every single one of them would say they would love nothing more than to go to the Minnesota Vikings. That would be the number one choice. Of all these teams that are quarterback teams, and we've run through all of them on this call, that is by far the best landing spot for any quarterback to go into. I mean, it's all set up, from the things that we talk about with the 3 Ps, with the play caller, the protection, the playmakers, check. Hey, maybe we don't want to rush right onto the field. We want to be able to sit and learn for a little bit. Well, we've got Sam Darnold who can get us through games. He can get us through the whole season if we needed him to, but at least get us through some games and get you comfortable before you're ready to go out there. I can't think of a better situation for a young quarterback than the one that the Minnesota Vikings have. That's why, to me, I think it's kind of foolish to look back and see, these teams or these people had these quarterbacks ranked wrong. And it's like, well, if you tell me where all they're going to go, it might inform how you would rate the players a little bit. I'd feel pretty confident Minnesota's got a good chance of getting some good production out of a quarterback that they take.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Jimmy Kemsky. Jimmy, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ. Offensive tackle question that's kind of coming from an Eagles perspective. They look for offensive linemen that have at least one really unique physical trait typically, and then hopefully they have good football character as well, and then they let Jeff Stout. Yeah. I'm curious which of the offensive tackles in this class you think have one exceptionally unique trait compared to the other top tackles in the class.
Wow. If you were asking me like who the Stoutland guys are in this draft, I mean, Fuaga would be way up there. I don't think that he's going to be in their mix. So if we're looking at the reasonable guys that they could have a shot at, Latham, Mims, and Guyton. And I think all three of those guys have exceptional physical traits. They're all enormous and long, and by all accounts are coachable. So, to me, I would be, you could try and split hairs there, but I think all three of those guys, they're 18, 22, and 23 on my list. And I think all three of those guys would be Jeff Stoutland, approved in terms of the ability that they have. I think Latham's a little bit further along in the progression than Mims and Guyton. But yeah, I think any of those three guys are there. I would think Stout would absolutely get the best out of them.
Thanks.
Yep.
Next question comes from Jory Epstein with Yahoo Sports. Jory, you may ask your question. Jory, you may ask your question. Jory Epstein.
Joy going once, going Joy twice.
All right, we'll go on to the next. Next question comes from John. Oh, there you go, Jory.
Sorry about that. Thanks so much for doing this, DJ. We talk a lot about how quarterback valuation has changed over the years, and one way I keep hearing from coaches and execs is teams' willingness to adapt to quarterbacks coming out versus looking for one cookie cutter style. How do you think that willingness to adapt to quarterbacks will influence the top quarterback prospects? Or put another way, how differently would the top 3 to 5 quarterbacks draft spots look now versus 20 years ago because of that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that sometimes we get carried away with how does this guy, walk in and fit the current offense that exists versus how do we, build around the most talented player. And I don't think you want to bypass talent too often, and especially at that position. So how do you cater towards them? I think that's been going on for probably a while now, though. You say like maybe 20 years ago it would have been different, but I would say, I think probably over 10 years now where you've seen teams be a little bit more flexible in terms of incorporating what these guys do well in the college game, and that's why we've seen the RPO stuff make its way up to the league and mirroring a little bit more of the college game than what it was previously. I also think one of the huge changes in quarterback evaluation and play is just having the when you have the voice in your ear, when you have the coach in your ear with the helmets, I think that's made that a lot easier to be able to communicate down in, down out with these guys what needs to be communicated other than just a play call. It's made that transition easier. So I think that's stuff over the last 20 years that you've seen that have eased the transition and trying to meet them more where they are instead of trying to turn all these guys into 6'5", 230 pound pure pocket quarterbacks. It's been that way for a while.
Next question comes from John McMullen. John, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, kind of a follow-up to your Eagles conversation just there with the tackles and Stout. With Lane Johnson still playing at a high level, Jordan Mailata just got $66 million. They prefer to get somebody who could start at guard and kick out. So of any of those guys you mentioned, better equipped to start inside than the others?
Yeah, of those three that I'd said, I would say Latham. Between Latham, Mims, and Guyton, that's a lot of man inside. All those guys are big, but you're talking about almost 6'8" with Mims and Guyton, where you're almost 6'6" with Latham. So to me, Latham would be the one that could kick in, but the two that could really do it are Fuaga and Fautanu. Those guys absolutely plug and play at guard, and then can graduate to tackle whenever Lane walked away. But I think you probably have to move up a little bit to get that done again. Howie's been more than willing to do that over the years too. He'll move either way, so I wouldn't rule that out. If one of those two guys started to drift, that's an easy, plug and play guard for sure.
Thanks, DJ.
Yep.
Next question comes from Nick Walters with ABC Las Vegas. Nick, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks for the time. There's a lot of chatter in Las Vegas and in Raider Nation about the quarterback position, but they might not have the ammunition like the Vikings to move up for Aiden Daniels. Right now, you actually have Michael Penix Jr. mocked to the Raiders in your most recent mock draft at 13. That might be like Penix's ceiling right there, but you say that he fits the Raiders' style of play. How does he fit that Raiders style of play under Luke Getsy? And if they decide to stay pat at quarterback, what non-quarterback options do you see there at right tackle and quarterback?
Yeah, look, to me, sometimes you just simplify it, and I'm like, okay, we can argue, well, you have him, where do you have him? Is he your 15th player, 20th player, or 34th player? Sometimes you can simplify it with two things. Number one, the quarterback is the most important position on the team. And is there an option where we're picking that's better than what we're playing with? And that's why I came, with the Penix thing. And Penix is he's my 34th player, I think, as of my last update. So 13, gosh, that feels like it's a little rich. But I'm like, I don't know. If you told me that I've got to move forward and I've got Gardner Minshew, who I think is a quality 2, who can get you out of a game or two, but I don't think he's a starter. I don't think you want him as your starter for the long term. And Aiden O'Connell, who's shown some good things, but to me, there's just a huge talent gap there. I think Penix has so much more ability, so that's why I've made that spot there for him. And obviously, in an ideal world, you'd trade back, get some extra picks, and nobody else takes him, and you get him and a little bonus there. But in terms of the other positions, you nailed it. I mean, corner and tackle, I think they'd have really good options there. I would love, Terrion Arnold or Quinyon Mitchell. I don't think you can go wrong with either one of those kids. Would be home run picks there. And then I think from a tackle perspective, that to me is like right around the sweet spot where you've got Fuaga, Faetanu, and Fashanu, the 3 Fs there. I think there's three guys that immediately upgrade your offensive line, and I don't know that there's a wrong pick there. I gave all 3 of the guys the same grade. They're 10th, 11th, and 15th on my list. So that's the decision that it's going to come down to. Do they feel like that's a big upgrade at the quarterback position, whoever that might be, or do you just do you address one of those other 2 big needs with guys that are ready to go? I think high floor players that you're not going to miss on for Antonio Pierce to get this team going.
Thank you.
Yep. Next question comes from Ryan McFadden. Ryan, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks for doing this. My question, I have a scenario for you. So if Brock Bowers is available at 12 for the Broncos to choose to select, do you think the Broncos should just go in and select them, or try to address a more pressing need on teams such as edge rusher, corner, or even offensive tackle?
Look, that's kind of the crux of drafting, right? Do you take the need or do you take the best player available? I've always, I always go back to the best player available, unless we're talking about the quarterback position. Quarterback position, you might be willing to, to adjust things a little bit because obviously of the importance there. But I would have a higher grade on Bowers at that point in time. I know they've got other tight ends, and they're, it's not like that's a dire need for them, but I think that's a premier player. And I think, whatever they're going to do quarterback wise, if it's Jarrett Stidham for another year, they go out and bring in a veteran. I don't think that's a bad option. If I was going to look at Bowers versus some of these other positional players, I think I might be one who actually leans towards best player available, and I'd take Bowers.
Next question comes from Bradley Locker. Bradley, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, I know you've talked about Keon Coleman as maybe a guy who could sneak into that first round. Are there other names you're kind of monitoring as one of those unsuspecting guys who maybe could be taken in the top 32?
Yeah, I mean, Leggett's mentioned a little bit, talking to people around the league. I think Xavier Leggett, there's a chance he goes late 1. I would still say I think he's going to go in the 2nd round. But that's one it's in the mix there. I know there's a lot of love for McConkey and Pearsall. There's definitely some Xavier Worthy teams. I think all those guys are, kind of mentioned there. I just know there's been years past where, I go back to like the DK Metcalf draft. Him, you've got AJ Brown. It seems like every year there's a couple of these guys that we have pegged as lock first rounders at the wideout position that teams just feel like because of the volume of wideouts, they can address some other needs and get one later. that I think we're more likely to see wideouts we believe are going in 1, they're going to slide to 2, than guys we believe are second rounders that are going to climb up into the first.
Next question comes from Blaine Grissack. Blaine, you may ask your question.
Come on.
Blaine? All right, we'll go to the next one. Jay Morrison, you may ask your question.
Daniel, thanks for doing this. I'm curious how far you think Tavondre Sweat falls with the DUI, and what type of organization would be the best fit for that kind of red flag, whether it's a no-nonsense head coach, a veteran locker room, or a city with a less than thriving nightlife?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think it's going to be different around the league. I think that answer to that question has to do with, whether people agree with it or not, is how good of a football player do you think he is? And I didn't know many teams that were as high on him as a player. So he wasn't in my top 50. And then, it's kind of, and it was explained away, but you go to the Senior Bowl, you don't weigh in. He's 366 pounds. And then now this thing happens, with the DWI a couple weeks out from the draft, which is just it's terrible judgment, and it's, immaturity in there as well. So look, if you thought he was a great player and you get a chance to, you'd be spending a lot of time with him on Zoom right now, with different members of your organization, from coaches and personnel staff and security folks, you name it. Like, you're going to be doing all kinds of homework to try and get comfortable with him if you like him. If you didn't like him, I think he's going to get pushed so far down. I would guess when it's all said and done, I think there's a chance. I think as high as he'd go, I'd be shocked if he went in the second round. To me, the third round would be the earliest I could see him going, and I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't go on day 2 and ended up going somewhere on day number 3.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Q Myers. Q, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, going back to the Michael Penix conversation with the Raiders at 13, is the risk worth the reward for the Raiders to go and grab a guy like Fuaga or the best offensive tackle to fill that right void on the offensive line, and then try to double down and get Penix maybe at the back end of round 1 if he's still available?
I think that's a very reasonable and thoughtful strategy. I think if you came out of this, if you asked me what is the home run draft for the Raiders, and you told me that they got Fuaga with the 13th pick, and they came back into the bottom of the first round and they got Michael Penix, I'll be on the set in Detroit, tipping my cap to Tom Telesco and Antonio Pierce, because I think that's everything's gone perfect type draft for me. I think that gives you the hope of the future with Penix, and it addresses a huge need, and would actually give Penix a better opportunity at success, or whoever's playing quarterback for that matter, by nailing that. So no, I think that's there's some, and if you love Penix, there's some risk involved there that maybe somebody else takes him. But man, if you pull it off and it works, I think that's a heck of a strategy.
As a reminder to media on the call, if you would like to ask a question, please utilize the raise hand function. We'll try and look to get through all of them. Next question comes from Parker Gabriel. Parker, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, maybe just framing the Broncos and the quarterback conversation slightly differently. How do you sort of evaluate, where they're at in terms of, roster-wise, and with Sean Payton, in terms of is it a good time for them to have a young quarterback on the roster? I mean, Sean's never actually really had a young guy that he's relied on. Obviously, had Drew Brees for a long time, but sort of in the spirit of the Vikings question, where are the Broncos in terms of, an attractive option for a young quarterback?
Look, it's not the Vikings, but look, I think it's set up to be functional. You look at having the offensive mind / play caller there, with Sean and Lombardi have been together forever. those guys know what they're doing. So you've got that taken care of. I think the offensive line's in decent shape. So you start there. They need, you don't have premier weapons, but they've got some interesting guys. I like what Mims did last year. They still got those veterans out there. So I think I put it this way. I think it's set up to be, sustainable. You're not going to ruin the quarterback by throwing him out there with that group right now. That's the line for me. Like, it's not, ideally, you like to have the Minnesota Vikings, and we've got everything in place, and we're going to go off and running. The Houston Texans, we've got, maybe the best left tackle in the NFL, and we've got a collection of good weapons, all that. Like, that's great. But to me, it's like, let's not be in a situation where we're throwing him out there and he's got no chance. And I don't think that's the case in Denver. I think you get out there, you get a chance for your quarterback to be functional for sure.
Next question comes from Joe Donahue. Joe, you may ask your question. Joe, please unmute.
Sorry, I had the wrong hit the wrong button there. DJ, thanks so much again for taking the time here. What do you think position-wise the Eagles would benefit most from with their late round picks, and in terms of adding value for the long run? And which players do you think might the Eagles target with some of their day 3 picks?
Yeah, I mean, look, day 3 is usually, you start with guys that can help contribute on special teams, while they're developing and growing. You look at corners and you look at off the ball linebackers. Those would be the places I would start. So when you start talking about day 3 guys, corners, guys like Josh Newton from TCU, Jarvis Brownlee from Louisville, those are a couple off the top here that I really like. I love Andrew Phillips from Kentucky. I think he's going to end up going on day 2. He's a really, really good player. But those are some of the names at the corner position. Then linebackers, day 3 linebackers that can help you immediately on special teams and then continue to grow and develop. I like Olafashio from Washington. I like Bertrand from Notre Dame. Musau from UCLA. Those are some guys, that to me are day 3 players that not only can help you on teams right away, but they're guys that I think have the potential to be solid starters in time.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, you may ask your question. Ray from Pittsburgh, please unmute if you want to ask a question. All right, we're going to the next one. Next question comes from Zennie Abraham. Zennie, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, how's it going?
Good.
Awesome. What do you think of Mohamed Kamara? He reminds me of Dwight Freeney if he agreed to stand up. He's one of the nation's, pass rushers, and I'm surprised he's not getting much mention.
I'm a Kamara guy, so I don't know that I put him in Freeney's category, but I loved him as a player. To me, it was funny that you mentioned that because I just pulled the numbers the other day on the top 10 times for edge rushers in this draft class, and I think he was 3rd. So you got somebody with 13 sacks. He knows how to rush. Look, he's a little undersized. He's 6'1.5", 248 pounds, but he's got big time burst. The Colorado game was the first game I watched, and he basically took the game over. But to me, he's someone where I have him slotted. He's outside my top 50, and I'll put my 150 out. I think that'll come out early next week. Mm-hmm. But outside my top 50, it's Chris Braswell is my first edge rusher, and Kamara is my second edge rusher. So that puts him, that you're talking about. I have him in the early 3rd round, range, maybe even in the late 2nd round range. So I'm a Mohamed Kamara fan, and there are teams around the league that feel the exact same way. So he's.
Where do you think
I don't believe he's getting out of day 2. So I'll put it that way.
That was my question. All right, cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Yep.
Next question comes from Jason Aponte. Jason, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ. Love your mock with Chop Robinson falling to 31. I think it's a home run pick. And obviously, we see the athletic gifts and the get-off, and we know that a lot of the talk around defensive linemen are based around Chris Kosurik and his work with defensive linemen. What would you say Chris Kosurik has to improve in Chop's game that will take him to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, unfortunately, I think as we get closer, he's not going to be there for them at that point in time, with the way everything's kind of gone for him through the process. But he's got the elite get off, big time burst. To me, it's just some of the finishing things, just being able to get to the quarterback and finish, being a little bit more under control. So those are things. Chris is as good as it gets in terms of coaching these guys. So the funny thing is, like, he starts first and foremost with get off, and that's covering ground, gaining ground. I think there's even more for him there. Ironically, he takes kind of choppy steps when he gets going. I think Kasserk would probably lengthen his stride out a little bit more and let him cover some more ground. And I think you'd actually get some early wins because of how explosive he is. So those are two areas I think that you'd have a chance to work with him and get even more out of him. But I know people have, you look at the production, this guy is ultra disruptive, and he changes games, the Michigan game being one of them, where they just refused to throw the ball anymore because they couldn't block the guy. So he's a really good player.
Next question comes from Dom Corbett. Dom, you may ask your question.
Hi DJ, thanks a lot for doing this. We've seen the rise of player tracking data being used by NFL teams to inform their draft picks. So Puka Nacua, obviously last year by the Rams, was identified as a much better game player than he was a tester. PFF have just released their own tracking data with GAS, Game Athleticism Score, and Next Gen Stats tweeted this perfect tweet for my question, where they said that Keon Coleman, who ran a 4.61, was actually the fastest player to run the gauntlet. So my question is, how fit for purpose is the on-field portion of the NFL Combine, particularly the 40-yard dash, given that NFL teams now have access to more valuable in-game data?
Well, I think it's still helpful because we don't have the in-game data going all the way back. So I think if you're thinking of value, like something like the 40, it goes back so long, and you can compare guys over, decades. Where it's like a profile of a player. You're like, well, but this guy ran this. Well, that reminds me of a player, maybe 15 years ago. Whereas we don't have that in-game data on those guys. We don't have their college GPS numbers to compare them. So I still think there is some value there until we get more of an inventory of the GPS stuff. But yeah, talking to teams, I mean, absolutely, they rely on that. The funny thing about the gauntlet, I'll give you a story on that. I talked to a team that liked Keon Coleman. I sent when those numbers are coming out before they even go on the air, they'll send them to me. Bill Smith, who runs the Next Gen Stats stuff department at the network, he will send me stuff and give me a heads up. So I saw that. And we had talked going into the combine about Puka Nacua having been the number one guy in terms of getting through the gauntlet the fastest, which shows a combination. I mean, I think it's valuable information, what I'm getting at. But so I had that information. I texted that to two different teams. One team I knew liked Keon Coleman. One team did not like Keon Coleman. The team that liked Keon Coleman said, absolutely, that translates to the tape. Not surprised. He's not a 40 guy, but he plays full speed at all times. And then the team that did not like him said, I don't know. What is this? I don't really put much value in that. So it's really just kind of those that wanted to confirm their existing opinions did, and those that didn't. So it's just kind of, as we get more accustomed in getting all this information, I think it's just important we have a longer track record, and then it will be irrefutable.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Next question comes from Nick Sabato. Nick, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for doing this. Xavier Worthy has kind of jumped up the last month or so. Probably not coincidental from the combine, but how much of that is from his combine workout? How much of it is from just kind of teams digging in a little bit more? And you touched on it a little in the last question, but with the 40, I think there's some GMs out there who think it's outdated. Has there been any talk of what might be a better way to track speed coming into the NFL?
Well, I mean, I think the way is what's out there, which is the GPS numbers that you have. So, that's a way to get the in-game speed. It's one of the reasons why I hadn't talked to one team, and obviously not many of them are in position to get Marvin Harrison Jr., but I haven't talked to one team that was concerned about him not running a 40. Like, we have the GPS numbers. GPS numbers are excellent. So there's no cause for concern with his in-game speed. So, that's on that side. With Worthy, look, I think he's always been someone who, when you're a little under, 165 pounds, you're not going to be talked about, all the way up there at the top. And he had drops, the year before. So this year caught the ball better, more consistently. He's still the weight is a little bit of a concern there. The speed, that wasn't a surprise to anybody when he broke that record. So I don't know that his stock has drastically changed is what I'm getting at. I think has been viewed by most people as kind of a, 20 to 40, he's kind of always been in that range, whether, if you love him, he's towards the front of that range. And if you're not as high on him, he's toward the back end of that range. But I think that's kind of always been his bumpers of where he was.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Scott Petrak with the Chronicle Telegram. Scott, you may ask your question.
Hey, thanks for doing this. Hey, the Browns aren't set to pick until 54. If they stay there, how would you rank the options at receiver and D tackle, which seem like possibilities for them?
Yeah, I mean, wide receiver is going to be a deeper group at 54. You're potentially looking at, you get Pearsall, you've got Troy Franklin from Oregon, I think will be there. I mentioned Corley earlier, Coleman, Roman Wilson. If you just want some speed, I mean, there's going to be a lot of options for guys that can really, really run. Leggett, I think, has trended up. I don't know that I don't see him being there at that point in time, but there's good guys there in the mix at the wide receiver position. At the defensive tackle position, I think you're having to take on maybe a little bit of a project there. The name I would not rule out is Dorless from Oregon. Jim Schwartz loves guys who can get up the field and attack in that jet front that he plays. And Dorless, as a 3 technique, can really, really get up the field. Really, really athletic dude. So that to me feels like a Jim Schwartz type pick. And I would also say someone like, Dwayne Carter is an interesting one as well. So those guys, I think the defensive tackles as a whole are going to get pushed up. I just think there's too much talk around the league about, this position and how hard it is to find and how impactful it can be if you get guys. So those are a couple names to keep an eye on.
Perfect. Thanks.
Next question comes from James Johnson. James, you may ask your question.
What's up, DJ?
What's happening?
I appreciate you doing this as well. So my question is, you mentioned teams that are trading up or could trade back or maneuver in the draft earlier. One team you didn't mention was the Jacksonville Jaguars. There's a lot of mocks of them trading up into the top 10 for Rome Odunze in terms of the trends that I'm seeing with mock drafts. So my question about that is, is that something you can see happening? And also, who do you think are fits? Because the one that comes to mind for me is the Falcons, who can maybe get a cornerback at 17. What say you to that?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So if you're looking at the Jags and, their collection here, they've got a couple 4s. They've got just their 2 and their 3 there. If they were going to move up, and it's not, I don't have the chart right in front of me, but I mean, that's going to be decently costly to go all the way up there to get Rome Odunze. So I don't know if I see that happening quite as much when I look at some of the other areas that they can address on their team, especially with the corner spot. I think I think it would be more along the lines of them, maybe trading up a few spots with a team like, New Orleans to get in front of Indy, to get up in that range, maybe to take a corner. I think that makes more sense to make a small move and go up there if Terran Arnold's there or if Quinyon Mitchell is there. I think that would be a little more reasonable. I love Rome Odunze. I've said he's my favorite player in the draft. I just think where Jacksonville is right now, I think it makes more sense for them to maybe stay where they are or a little baby move to go get a corner.
Next question comes from Jordan Ham. Jordan, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for doing this. I wanted to ask you about a couple Arizona Wildcats. With Jordan Morgan, there's been a lot of talk of him starting at guard, potentially bumping out to tackle. What do you feel like the best situation is for a guy like him? And then where do you see Jacob Cowing's skill set translating to the pros?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, there's teams that are really high on Jordan Morgan. I know one team that thinks he's one of the 3 or 4 best tackles in the draft. So that's a little bit higher than I am on him. My concern with him was just really play strength. And, I've been burned a couple times on guys that are really good athletes, have great feet, but just didn't have the core strength. And I'm thinking, look, another year off the ACL, that gets better. And you'll see that improve. But that was my one area of concern, which to me, that would not be a great move inside the guard. I think he's better off staying at tackle. When I look at Cowing, I mean, he's a fun player, and I think what helps him when you look at Tank Dell, what he did last year. I don't think he's Tank Dell, but I think he's he's got some of that to him with big time speed. He knows how to run routes. I love the consistency. When you catch a ball in 57 straight games, that's pretty nuts. But he can win right away. I think he's competitive after the catch for somebody who's a little undersized. The USC game should show you all you need to know about what he's capable of. So, the grade I gave him is like a 4th round grade, and I think that's probably about where he goes and where he lands. And I think he's a fun player. I think he's a fun player to incorporate into your offense.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Jaredine Christensen. Jaredine, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks so much for doing this. With the rise that we have seen from JJ McCarthy, I feel like every year we get, 1 or 2 players that just, some people love them and some people tend to be on the other side. I'm one of those people on the other side. Is there another prospect in this draft who you felt like has just flown up draft boards, and that, people shouldn't be surprised that they end up being, let's say, like a top 20 pick?
All right. So guys that have flown up draft boards. Well, I mean, there's different levels of it, right? So I mentioned that Byron Murphy, who I have as like 19 right now. If he went the top 10, it wouldn't shock me. Chop Robinson's 21. If he was, he went up 10 spots higher than that, wouldn't shock me. Those guys are 2 guys that have kind of buzzed up through the process. Other guys going through here. One that I'm interested because I know some teams really like him is Junior Colson, the linebacker from Michigan. It's not a great off the ball linebacker draft, and I know teams that have him as the top off the ball linebacker, and the like intangibles and all that stuff are off the charts. So if you're looking like who's a sneaky potential 1st round pick, he's my 44th player. I wouldn't sleep on that one as a potential one. And then any other ones? I mean, Leggett, who I've mentioned, has some love. You see Buffalo mentioned as a potential spot for him in the bottom of the 1st round. That would be another one I'd say that's got some buzz here coming down the home stretch.
Well, thanks so much.
Yep.
Next question comes from Vince Ferrara. Vince, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, great to talk to you. I want to ask you about our guy and your guy, Charles Davis's Tennessee Volunteers for this draft, and specifically Jalen Wright and Joe Milton. If there are any team fits or landing spots potentially that you think would work for those guys, and then also if you see any other balls potentially getting drafted.
Yeah, I mean, look, Jalen Wright's he's so explosive and so dynamic in terms of finding fits for him and those guys. Look, the speed plays anywhere. I always go back to, Kansas City continuing to add speed. I don't care how many running backs, how many guys they have. When I see guys with big time juice like that, that's the first team that jumps into my mind. I think he goes in I think he'll go in the 3rd round would be my guess of where he ends up going. Joe Milton is, he's interesting because he's raw, but he's a 6th-year player. So, that's kind of a tough combination to sell a little bit there. So I think he's a late round flyer. in terms of trying to find a team, I think you just want to go somewhere where they've got a good quarterback developer. But I think that'll be pretty late in the draft. And then in terms of other guys, you've got the corner, Haddon or Hayden. I always pronounce it wrong. But I think he's got the shoulder surgery coming off that. He's got some playmaking ability, but I think he's a late one as well.
Thank you. Next question comes from Daniel Ezirkis. Daniel, you may ask your question.
Hi, I was just kind of curious. You were speaking about the Miami Dolphins, about a team that's like ready to go now. Obviously, the draft being Detroit, I kind of view the Lions in that same situation. Is that a team you can see moving up this year's class?
Hit me up on that one more time. I could barely hear you. I'm sorry.
I apologize. Could you see the Detroit Lions as a team of interest in moving up in this year's draft class, being they're kind of in like that win now window?
Yeah, I wouldn't rule that out. They've got some age on the offensive line. So if there's a guy that they feel like they love, to go up there and get one, that wouldn't shock me at all. They have a corner position as one they can continue to look at. They've done a lot of homework on the corner class and talking to some agents over the last week. So, I think one of those top corners starts to drift a little bit. They could go up there and do that as well. But you hit it. I mean, they're knocking on the door. They are right on the cusp of being a championship team. And so if there's a time to be aggressive, this would be it.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Scoop Morganroth. Scoop, you may ask your question.
Thank you, DJ. It's a pleasure to meet you. First of all, when you look at the draft itself, could you identify any hidden gem quarterbacks beyond rounds 1 and 2? Because I know obviously everybody's talked about the bigger names. And then when you look at that, would you say that this quarterback draft is much deeper than most people think that it really is?
Well, I think when we say it's deep, we're talking about, the top 6 guys. That's a big number. When you have 6 guys that, are in the mix to be in the first round, I mean, that's what I think that we're talking about, the depth. Outside of that, I would say there's the 3 names that intrigue me the most, and I would put them in this order, would be Spencer Rattler from South Carolina, who's got a lot of twitch and a live arm. I think, all the stuff's out there. It's been discussed, but he's grown up a ton throughout his career in transferring from Oklahoma, and 2-time captain. They rave about him at South Carolina. There's a lot to like about him. Again, not the biggest guy, but a real a live arm and someone who I think's got a shot. Like if you're going to say who has a chance to be a starter outside of those 6, he'd be my first one. And then after that, it's Devin Leary from Kentucky. Who I think throws the ball really well, and it's kind of rhythm, timing, touch. He's tough. He'll hang in there. He can, if things break down, he's got a chance to get outside and make some things happen. He feels like he's been around forever, but he would be second in that tier. And then after that would be Mike Pratt from Tulane is another one who's someone that can function inside the pocket. He can make some guys miss. He has a beautiful deep ball. I just wanted to see him be a little more consistent underneath, but there's some traits and some tools to like there. So those would be the 3 guys in that order for me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Next question comes from Dave Naylor. Dave, you may ask your question.
Hi, Daniel. Wanted to get just maybe a few thoughts on some of the Canadians that are in this year's draft. Just throw some names at you. Just give me a thought or two on each of them, if that's cool.
Yep.
Start with Theo Johnson at Penn State, and could he be the 3rd tight end off the board?
Yeah, Theo Johnson's definitely in that mix. He is my 4th tight end. So no, I mean, obviously the traits and the tools are there. When you're 6'6" and you're almost 260 pounds, you run 4.57. He's got a huge catch radius. He can really get down the seam. He's outstanding in terms of the physicality after the catch. I love that competitiveness there. He's not the most defined, precise route runner. I think there's some development to take place there. But I don't think it's a great tight end draft. And if you told me that he was the 2nd tight end to go, I wouldn't bat an eye.
Another Canadian tight, Tanner McLaughlin at Arizona.
Yeah, so Tanner McLaughlin, I actually have just over him. So he's my second tight end in this draft, which I think probably might surprise some people. But I was a big fan of his game. He just really good working in the middle of the field. I think it's an instinct position. I think he's got as good instincts as anybody in the draft at that spot. So being able to work in space, find holes, accelerate through the ball, trust his hands. His effort is there. I don't think he's gonna, not gonna win any awards in the run game, but the effort's there. There's enough want to that you can work with him. So I'm a fan.
You can see McLaughlin as a day 2 pick then.
I have him as a day 2 pick. I haven't got the exact same love reciprocated when I've talked to people around the league. They like him. I'm higher on him, and it's one of those ones where I'm okay with that. So if you're asking where I think he's going to go, I'd say he probably goes, in late in the 3rd round, maybe in the 4th round. But I have him personally rated higher than that.
God, just a couple names to throw you quickly. Isaiah Adams at Illinois, offensive line.
Yep. Isaiah Adams. Pull him up real quick. I normally get sick a week after the draft. This year I decided to switch it up and get a little cold here before this one. Yeah, look, I see his name floating around a lot. To me, he's more of a day 3 player. I thought he was more of like a 5th round type guy who's got some versatility inside and outside. I like the power. I just thought the Penn State game was a rough one for him out there at tackle. I think he's better off, playing inside and holding up there at guard. But I thought he was more of a round 5 type guy.
And the kid who was the biggest kid at the combine this year, the tackle from Howard, Anim Dankwa.
Yeah, that's a large human being. So with him, again, developmental player, he's massive, 353 pounds. I thought he was kind of more of an absorbed blocks guy than someone who could uproot people and move people. And I thought he had some issues, just pass pro, some change of direction stuff. So very much love the traits. There's a lot to work with there, but felt more like a project to me. It was more of kind of a practice squad player that you take a flyer on like the 6th or 7th round.
And just to close out, the 2 tackles from the University of British Columbia who are getting some attention from the U Sport Canadian level, Theo Benedict and Giovanni Manu.
Yeah, so I've done Manu just off of literally just watched his workout. So that's the homework that I've done on him. The 2 that I did were Manu and then Clayton. Where was Clayton? Might be from England, I think. Those are 2 of the international guys that got thrown my way. Manu was very much felt like, again, similar with like a practice squad type player. Massive human being. Again, it's tough to come up with a ton off of just what I've seen there. But straight line, explosive, tested well. Just thought, I didn't think he was quite as natural in his movement. I was actually kind of intrigued by, I guess the kid who's from England was Travis Clayton, who was the one that I watched. But the 3rd name that you mentioned, I had not done any homework on him as of yet.
Got you. Would you see Manu as a PFA?
We gotta go on, Dave.
Yeah. No, he would be. Yeah, he would be a PFA for me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yep, no problem.
Next question comes from Joe Cook. Joe, you may ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you for doing this. So I got where you see Mississippi State's Nathaniel Watson, Southern Miss's Frank Gore, and any players from Ole Miss that are kind of catching your eye.
Sure. Let's go through them here. So let's start back. Frank Gore, I think he'll be probably a late day 3 pick, but to me, he makes your team. He has a role. I love the way that he competes. He's got really good vision. He's got really good balance. I'm a fan of his game. I don't think he's going to go particularly high, but I think he makes your team and has a role in your backfield. With Watson from Mississippi State, I think I'm higher on him than teams. And talking to him, I liked him. I liked him kind of like a 4th round player. Teams that I talked to had him a little bit lower than that, but I just don't think they knew exactly what to do with him. But the production's off the charts. Obviously, what he does is a blitzer, shooting gaps, making disruptive plays. Kind of gets pinballed and bounced around a little bit in there. Wish he was a little bit bigger, but to me, plays really hard. And I think with him, it's a high floor from the standpoint that you have an unbelievable special teams player. With his skill set, it should translate very well there. And I think you continue to work with him and develop him as a linebacker. So that would be that one. And then let me see who else. We want to talk about Ole Miss. Is that what you're looking for? Ole Miss guys?
Yeah, just anyone from Ole Miss that looks out.
Yeah, Trey Prince. You know, when you're a corner and you run 4.38, you know that's going to get your attention. I thought his eyes got him in trouble as a player. He struggled a little bit against McConkey, but again, you see big time bursts when he can trigger and get downhill. You'll see some big hits. He's a physical kid. He's tough. I thought he was a developmental player, you know, a day 3 pick. But anytime you get a corner that runs 4.38 and he's 6 feet tall, he's going to get drafted.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Christian Booher. Christian, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ. I was wondering if the Lions elect to go trenches earlier in the draft, who are maybe some day 2, day 3 wide receivers who you think could fill the Josh Reynolds role after he departs?
Okay. Look, Jalen Polk would be one from Washington who can do that as someone who gives you some physicality there and some toughness. That would be one that would fit that role. Brendan Rice from USC would be another one. I could see filling that position. Those are two that come right to the top of my head. And I'm intrigued to see where Luke McCaffrey's going to go. I think he's a fascinating one who hasn't been at the position very long, who just makes a lot of plays and is kind of still developing and growing. Obviously, the gene pool is outstanding. But I thought he got better as the season went along, and I thought he was excellent at the Senior Bowl, culminating in a really good Senior Bowl game. So that would be another one I think that would be a really interesting fit there.
Next question comes from Ian Roundtree. Ian, you may ask your question.
Thank you very much, DJ, for taking this time with us. Every year we see this debate about a tackle being better suited for playing inside. This year's Fautanu, maybe in other years was Rashawn Slater. Like, what are the things that you technically or scouting wise look upon deciding where these players fit better? I mean, beyond the arm length and maybe the footwork.
Well, I mean, look, the arm length is part of it. I mean, you get guys that's just in the room. When you get a guy with short arms at tackle, teams, you know, in the department are going to say, well, you know, we got to at least have the idea of how he would hold up at guard if he can't hang out there at tackle. To me, it's just core strength more than anything else. Like, you know, if you're a tackle who might not have the agility, you know, the athleticism to hold up at tackle in the NFL level, you obviously see a different caliber of rusher, and we're going to try and project you inside the guard. Well, you better have core strength, and you better be able to, you know, to drop your weight and anchor down, because you can't play with a flimsy, you cannot play with a flimsy interior player in the NFL. So that to me is like the checklist when you're looking at, can somebody do that? Vera Tucker is a great example of someone who wasn't real long, but you felt like I felt like he can play tackle, and he's done it. He's played tackle at a solid level, but had a chance to be an all-pro guard because of his strength, his anchor, you know, that power core that he has. That translates very well inside. Now, obviously, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. That's been his issue. But that, you know, that's an example of a guy like that. And Fautanu is in this year's draft. He's got incredible length. So while he's not the tallest guy in the world, he's got really, really long arms, which leads to believe that, you know, he could still hang out there at tackle. And I think he's got all the tackle tools, but he has that power and core strength where some people that have tackles in place are like, dude, I could make this guy an all-pro guard. And I know one team that feels like he could be the best center in the draft. So he's a legit 5-position guy.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Next question comes from Adam West. Adam, you may ask your question.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Thanks, DJ, for kind of giving us the DJ flu game, with you kind of sticking in there and just being an absolute machine. I'm just gonna, so I covered this thing. I'm just gonna throw some names out there. Eric McCoy, 2nd round pick. Trevor Penning, 1st round pick. previously Andres Pete, who's a free agent, first round pick, Theodore Reese, first round pick, Ryan Ramczyk, first round pick, although his career may be, in jeopardy, he may have to retire because of injuries. The Saints have heavily invested in the offensive line, early premium draft capital, and with the draft capital they've invested, you would kind of expect that they should have like a top 5 type of offensive line, and that just hasn't been the case. With them likely potentially drafting another offensive tackle this year in the draft at 14, or maybe moving up, with players not working out like Penning and Reese is serviceable, is it a coaching issue or is it a scouting issue?
Well, I mean, I think that's a great question. I would say it's a combination. I don't think you make first round picks really anymore unless your coaches and your personnel department are on the same page for the most part, or else one of you is leaving, right? And whether the coach is on the way out or the GM's on the way out. But I think there's usually alignment when those decisions are made. So I think the blame you can spread around. I think, some of those players, why they didn't work out, I don't think there's any connection to it when I look through those guys and rolling through that list of names that you just rattled off there. I mean, Penning, like if we, that's the most recent in terms of the one that you might be already replacing. The size was there, obviously the temperament and the tenacity and the willingness to work and all that stuff was there. He just, balance was an issue for him coming out, and that is has been kind of a killer for him when he's been in the NFL. So that's that particular one. But I don't think you can shy away from it. It's so important, and it's a position group that it dictates a lot of your success, not only as an offense but as a team. I don't think you can say, well, we have, it's been a blind spot for us, so let's draft another position so we don't make another mistake. You just got to suck it up and keep swinging, and they've got to get that solved if they're going to be where they want to be. So, I think you got to try and learn your lessons from the mistakes you've made in the past, but they've got to get right back on the horse. And I don't really see how they go any other direction but offensive tackle with their first pick, and where they are with this draft. They should be able to get that accomplished. But it's every organization has issues with certain positions. I've been on organizations, when I was in Baltimore, we couldn't get the receiver thing figured out, and they just kept swinging, and then all of a sudden last year you look up and you see Zay Flowers out there, looks like a superstar. So you got to keep swinging.
Thanks so much, DJ.
Yep.
Next question comes from Stephen Box. Stephen, you may ask your question.
AD, for your time today. It seems like the 49ers are, being projected a lot for either a defensive end or an offensive lineman, but it's starting to feel more and more like the guys that they might really want there at the end of round 1 might already be gone. Do you see them potentially moving up or moving back, or if they do stay still, is there a different position they might look at taking?
Well, I mean, they've got a nice haul of picks here. So if they want to move up, they absolutely have the ammunition to do so. I just think when you look at the needs that they have in some of the different areas that they could go, if you're thinking about corners and edge rushers, maybe you miss out on that top tier. But I mean, interior offensive linemen, grabbing a wide receiver if they want one. I still think there'll be a quality corner there, personally, even though some of those top guys might go. I don't really see them in a position where they need to do that. I think this is more filling out your roster, getting a layer of depth. They have the stars in place. So I don't think, they're in a position where they have a must, hey, we've got to get up there. We must get this accomplished. I don't feel like they're in that spot here. I think they can be a little more patient than that.
Right. And then one other quick question. In terms of tight end, they've been trying to find either a complement or a potential replacement for George Kittle for a couple of years now. Do you see anybody in this draft? I know it's not particularly deep at this position, but do you see any tight ends in this draft that they might look at?
Well, I mean, they want their tight ends to be able to block and be a part of that, process. So, and unfortunately with today's college game, that lops off a good chunk of them. But, Cade Stover from Ohio State would be one. That would be one who's got some ruggedness and some toughness to him. That would kind of fit the mold a little bit there. So that'd be one name I'd throw out there.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Phil Ford. Phil, you may ask your question.
Hey DJ, just real quick, you mentioned earlier that potentially 6 quarterbacks could go in the first round of the draft. Just what sets this quarterback class apart kind of in historical terms? And then at the top of it, what has Caleb Williams shown that kind of sets him apart from all these other quarterbacks that could be first rounders?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, it's one thing to feel good about the number of guys we could have go. It's another thing to see how all their careers pan out, because gosh, if you'd have told me that the year where we had what was the 5 quarterbacks that we'd be looking up here, and you'd have Zach Wilson, they haven't been able to trade, that the Jets are done there. You look at Trey Lance has been traded, Max gone. Justin Fields is gone. Like, if you'd have told me that, and then Trevor, there's been questions about some regression there. So that was an example of a draft. We had all these guys go, and it hasn't always worked out. And in fact, it hasn't been good at all. So I just think that there's a lot of ability with these guys, and you take your shot when the ability's there, and hopefully, you have a little bit higher batting average in that group that we just went through. But in terms of Caleb being the guy, I think he's just got the most in his body. Like, he's, in terms of being able to do everything, to make every type of throw, there's a physicality to him that I think is an underrated aspect. Just his toughness, be able to pull through tackles, be able to absorb hits, and be durable that way. I love that about him. The playmaking stuff, the creativity is, everybody's seen all that stuff. I think that's pretty rare, the things he can do there. But to me, all the things you want to do in an offense, he can do. So I think he expands your playbook in a big way. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's the top guy.
Next question comes from Gianna Hahn with the Baltimore Banner. Gianna, you may ask your question.
Hi, thank you for doing this. I know there have been a lot of questions about quarterback evaluation. I just wanted to ask about Lamar Jackson specifically. When it came to the doubts that he had during his evaluation prospect, now his success, how do you think that's affecting prospects in the way they're evaluated now?
Well, I mean, look, I know everybody had different opinions there. I wish I could go back and have a higher grade on Lamar, but I think he was my 32nd player. I thought he was, he had, he was very dynamic and had the upside to be really, really good. There was just, you need to make sure you fit him with the right spot and use him properly and correctly. And that's where he went. He went to the Ravens. They crafted an offense around what he does really well. And then his dynamic tools just took off. And then you've seen him continue to grow and develop, in the passing game throughout the years. So I think the lesson there is, first of all, don't ever pass up, that rare of a dynamic player. I think the other lesson, and I remember talking about this during that run-up, is I think some people struggle with it because if you watched him on tape, you could see two incompletions a game that were it was like 2 terrible plays where there'd be just throws and you'd be like, golly, that was awful. At the end of the day, they're 2 incompletions. It's no different if he missed it by a foot or if he missed it by 10 feet. But there was so much other good in there with him as a runner, as a creator, and even as a passer, working in the middle of the field, very comfortable. Outside the numbers, he wasn't as accurate. So I think that people made more of the few bad plays than they should have in that evaluation. So I think those are some of the lessons you could take away from Lamar.
Next question comes from Ray Fittipaldo with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, with the acquisition of Russell Wilson and with Cam Hayward and TJ Watt and Minka all getting older, do you think this draft strategy changes for the Steelers at all, just in terms of maybe not going after that guy with a lot of potential, but maybe just targeting, plug and play guys to fill those major holes that are on their roster?
Well, I think they have specific things they need to get accomplished here. Starting with the center position, obviously adding something to the wide receiver room. I think they can be a little more targeted, to answer your question there. I think, thinking about best player available, or do we target specific needs? I think it's helpful when you don't just have one specific need in a sense. They have a couple different areas they need to address, and they kind of be flexible based off who's there, of what order they go and addressing those positions. But yeah, I mean, they're ready to win right now. I think they've kind of tried to form their identity, get back to who they are. They want to run the football. They want to be better up front. I thought the offensive line took some steps forward with the additions they had last year. I think they continue to add to it this year. And then they just got to get some production out of the quarterback position, whether that's Russell or whether that's Fields. That's going to determine their success. But I agree with you from the standpoint of they don't need to pick somebody for 3 years from now. They are ready to go right now. They need to plug some of those spots.
Next question comes from Chris Franklin. Chris, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for doing that. Sorry about that earlier. When you look at the Eagles, they have, with those 2 second-round picks, on offense, they're pretty set at a lot of those spots, especially receiver and running back. But they do have Devontae Parker and Paris Campbell on both one-year deals, and Kenneth Gainwell's contract ends next year, and they don't have there's a spot potentially open for a third running back. Are there any skill guys that you see potentially being that spot, them taking in day 2? Or if not, who would be a guy in day 3 that they can potentially pick up to fill on those roles?
Yeah, I think I'll put it this way: the Eagles will draft a running back on day 3, or I'll buy you lunch, Chris. The next time I see, if I ever see anywhere, and they have not drafted a day 3 running back, not like a fancy sit down lunch, like a sandwich place.
That's good.
But yeah, no, I think you'll see the Eagles take a running back on day 3. The guy that I liked, I just did him the other day. I was going through the non-combine guys. Was Blake Watson from Memphis. I just know when I worked there, Howie was always big on explosives. Like, he wanted to see how many explosive runs guys had, catches. Like, he wanted guys that could go the distance as running backs and have some juice. So this is a guy who ran 4.4 flat, who's got a ton of production, both rushing and catching the ball. So that's like a day 3 back to me that would be a fun one. And then when you're looking at receivers, I go back to like Quez Watkins as being a good hit for them late. So if you're looking late receivers with traits, right, big time speed, they can go. You get to like Anthony Gould, who can return from Oregon State. He's got, ran 4.39. He's undersized, but like that's kind of a fun flyer to take, late in the draft on somebody who has some return value, who has some also the ability to get on top of coverage. So those types of players are fun. That's the fun part of scouting, is trying to find those guys on day 3 that can, first of all, make your team, and then hopefully carve out a role.
Final question comes from Anthony Cosenza with SB Nation. Anthony, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks for the time today. Save the best for last, I guess. Some of your favorite day 2 offensive tackles. We know kind of the big names in the first round that'll likely go. And then just from a Cincinnati Bengals perspective, maybe best fit at that position for them, and maybe kind of ideal first couple of rounds for them.
Sure. Day 2 offensive tackles that I like Blake Fisher a lot from Notre Dame. I'm probably going to be a little bit higher on him than a lot of folks, but I think he's got a chance to be a starting right tackle. I think he could kick inside if he had to, but I think he's a tackle. I like Christian Jones from Texas as well. Those would be the 2 names that I would have there. I think would be, excellent day 2 guys that are ready to play and really intriguing. In terms of the Cincinnati Bengals and everything, going perfect for them, where they're picking at 18, obviously the throw a parade scenario is somehow Brock Bowers got down there. I don't think it'll happen, but hey, every now and then you get one thing like this that happens and a guy slides down. But that would be the home run of all home runs if somehow he navigated his way down to 18. But outside of that, I mean, one of these offensive linemen getting there, and I like Fatanu to me is somebody who could play anywhere. That would be a fun one as well. If that was if we're looking for the home run scenario. By the way, as we're finishing this thing up, you guys are all so lucky, because if King didn't just lose this no-hitter with 2 outs in the 7th inning, I would have been so insufferable by the end of this conference call. I was already I've got a cold. I was already feeling better. when he had a no-no in the 7th inning, and then apparently he gave up a hit. So,
Well, thank you. That concludes today's call. Thank you, DJ, for the time, and thank you, media, for joining us.
Andrew's a Dodger fan. That's why he's not even referencing what I just said. That's just full transparency.
I mean, first place doesn't need mentioning. A transcript of today's transcript and audio of today's call will be made available through NFL Communications and on Twitter from @NFL Media. To confirm, Daniel, Charles Davis, and Joel Klatt will be available in Detroit next week on Wednesday, April 24th from 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time at the Corner Ballpark. Thank you again, and see you next week.
Okay, everybody. So the Zoom call is over. Mr. Jeremiah did his great job as usual. I'll go through your. Sorry, I was multitasking. So let me take. See, did he go away or did it stop? Let me make sure that. See here. So I see that. If I click on Zoom, it's gone. So let me see if I have to sign back in. I want to make sure that he's. Sometimes the Zoom collapses. It's spinning. But I think what I'll do is, so I'm waiting. Maybe he stopped it. Or, I have an idea here. Hold on a second.
Team that lops off a good chunk of them. But, Cade Stover, right spot and use him properly, correctly. And that's where he went. He went to the Ravens. They crafted an offense around what he does really well. And then his dynamic tools just took off. And then you've seen him continue to grow and develop, in the passing game throughout the years. So I think the lesson there is, first of all, don't ever pass up, that rare of a dynamic player. I think the other lesson, and I remember talking about this during that run-up, is I think some people struggle with it because if you watched him on tape, you could see two incompletions a game that were just, it was like two terrible plays where there'd be just throws and you'd be like, golly, that was.
Hold on.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for doing that. Sorry about that earlier. When you look at the Eagles, they have, with those 2 second-round picks, on offense, they're pretty set at a lot of those spots, especially receiver or running back. But they do have Devontae Parker, Paris Campbell on both one-year deals, and Kenneth Gainwell's contract ends next year.
A.m. to 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time at the Corner Ballpark. Thank you again, and see you next week.
Okay, that was it. So that's over. All right. So that's over. That's why it happened. So that's over there. So I feel free to leave the meeting there and bring this over here and then talk. And I'll get your comments. I think only the two, and I answered those. The takeaway for me of Daniel's presentation, the emergence of Jaden Daniels as the Commanders' quarterback over Drake May, although Daniel believes that Drake May is a better prospect. Daniels can run. It's not that May can't, but Daniels is literally the second coming of Lamar Jackson with a better arm. And Lamar Jackson has a great arm, okay? And he's got more of a history playing in a polished passing game than Lamar did at Louisville. So the comparisons are there. And when you see the guy run, he's the perfect dual threat quarterback. There's a reason he was your Heisman Trophy winner. Not much jumped off other than that. We're at the point now where we're getting into some expecteds. Caleb Williams is Chicago Bear. Would I be shocked if the Bears decided to pull north and take Marvin Harrison and then trade down for quarterback, and then pick up a quarterback with a second pick? No, it wouldn't shock me, because I am not entirely convinced that Caleb is that guy. However, he's a national champion, okay, but he had a fall off year last year without question. And even though he was, well, right up there at the end of the day regarding the Heisman, well, actually he wasn't. But my point is he really had a fall off year. I don't know why I said that, because it was Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and Jaden Daniels. But he really had a fall off year. But toward the start of in the middle of the year, he was the best quarterback in the country. Williams was, and he was the year before that. So, but there is a lot to be said for playing on USC. So it says Mo Kamara is going to be a beast. Hope the Eagles can pick him up. He's going to be a beast. He's going to be a Dwight Freeney. I really believe that he has it within him to be that guy. And if you take a look at his tape, he has these signature Dwight Freeney-like moves where he submarines under. He is relentless. He's got, how many times you heard it, but it really does apply in his instance. He has a higher motor. And now you asked me, I believe someone asked me about Mr. Javon Solomon from Troy, who led the NCAA in sacks with 14 versus Mo's 12, and says that DeMarcus Ware came from Troy and his stats are somewhat better than Ware is at Troy. I agree. The reason why I take Kamara is, well, he's flat out fast. Now he runs a 40 and 4.57. He's not super undersized. He's 6'1", and there are a number of defensive ends / outside linebackers who have successfully played at that stature, if you will, going all the way back to Hugh Green from Pittsburgh, who really was the prototypical draftee from Pitt who set the tone for that position. And he says, yeah, he does look like Freeney. His transition from speed to power on his rush is pretty impressive. Yeah, it's at times it's shocking the way he gets through the traffic. It's like he's darting through these trees, and the trees are literally, close together, right? They really are. So I think Mo is a man to watch. I would not have a problem seeing him go to the lower round, in the lower rounds of the first round. I think he's that good. More likely second round, but he's a name, Mo Kamara, to watch. Now, does that say anything about Solomon? You're talking about Solomon. I believe someone's talked about Solomon as compared with DeMarcus Ware. I get that. Okay, so it's been now almost 2 hours, and I'm on a hard stop at 2 hours, so I'm going to shove. I want to thank everybody for watching. Thank you, Jeremiah, for all that you do. Do more. Subscribe to Zennie62 for our 20th coverage of the NFL Draft, this time in Detroit. I'll see you all later, everybody. Thank you. Please make sure you subscribe and like and subscribe this video. Thank you all. Thank you. See ya.